Hey there, welcome to Mr. Cozy True Crime Stories. Tonight, we're diving into 2 hours of gripping true crime cases. Real stories of mystery, betrayal, and cold-blooded crimes, all set against the soothing backdrop of rain. It's the perfect blend of calm and unsettling. If these cases draw you in, tap that like button, share with your fellow true crime lovers, and subscribe to join our curious community. I'm always wondering, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Drop it in the comments below. Now settle in, and let's dig into the darkness. Story 1. The evening air in Union, South Carolina, on October 25, 1994, was thick with the humidity of a lingering southern autumn. The sky was a deep, starless black, a canvas against which a mother's worst nightmare was about to be painted for the world to see. At around 9:15 p.m., a frantic woman, Susan Smith, burst into a nearby home, her face a mask of terror. She told a story that would send a chill through the heart of the small town and ignite a nationwide media firestorm. She claimed a black man had carjacked her at a stoplight, forcing her out of her 1990 Mazda Protege and speeding off with her 2 young sons, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex, still strapped in their car seats in the back. For 9 agonizing days, Susan Smith, a 23-year-old woman from a troubled background, played the part of a grieving mother with chilling conviction. She appeared on national television, her voice choked with manufactured tears, pleading for the safe return of her babies. She and her estranged husband, David Smith, held hands before the cameras, their faces etched with a sorrow that seemed all too real. The nation watched, prayed, and wept with them. But behind the facade of a heartbroken victim, a monstrous secret festered. The story of the carjacker was a lie, a cruel and calculated deception designed to conceal an unthinkable act of betrayal. The truth, when it finally emerged, was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Susan Smith had not been the victim of a crime. She was the perpetrator of one so heinous it would forever be seared into the collective memory of the nation. Her sons were not missing. They were at the bottom of John D. Long Lake, sent to their watery graves by the one person who should have protected them above all others. In the days following the fabricated carjacking, Susan Smith's face was everywhere. Her tearful pleas for the return of her sons were broadcast across the country, her words carefully chosen to evoke sympathy and despair. "My children wanted me," she cried in one televised interview. "They needed me, and now I can't help them." She described her boys in heart-wrenching detail, Michael, the loving older brother, and Alex, the baby with the infectious smile. She and David, from whom she had recently separated, presented a united front of parental anguish, holding hands and offering rewards for any information that might lead to their children's rescue. The town of Union rallied around the Smiths. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through dense woods and along lonely back roads. Yellow ribbons, symbols of hope for the missing, were tied to trees and mailboxes. The story captivated the nation, tapping into a primal fear shared by all parents. It was a story of innocence lost, of a family shattered by a random act of violence. But for the investigators tasked with finding Michael and Alex, the narrative Susan was so desperately trying to sell was beginning to unravel. Sheriff Howard Wells of Union County was a seasoned lawman, and from the beginning, something about Susan's story felt wrong. The details were just a little too neat, a little too rehearsed. She claimed the carjacker had forced her to stop at a red light at Monarch Mills, an intersection that investigators knew was rarely busy at that time of night. The traffic light, they determined, would not have turned red unless another vehicle was present to trigger the sensor, a detail that contradicted Susan's claim that she was alone on the road. Furthermore, her emotional state seemed to fluctuate in ways that aroused suspicion. One moment she would be a hysterical, weeping mess, the next she would appear calm, almost detached. During a polygraph test administered 2 days after the supposed abduction, her responses were deemed deceptive. As the days wore on, the inconsistencies in her story mounted. Investigators began quietly searching the area's numerous lakes and ponds, including the murky waters of John D. Long Lake, a place the Smiths knew well. They were operating on a grim hunch, a possibility so dark they hardly dared to speak it aloud. While the public saw a grieving mother, the police were beginning to see a suspect. The media frenzy, however, continued unabated. Susan, seemingly oblivious to the growing suspicion of law enforcement, continued her public performance. She appeared on morning talk shows and evening news programs, her face a constant presence on television screens across America. The story of the black carjacker also fanned the flames of racial tension, a detail that made the case even more volatile. But the truth, as it so often does, was clawing its way to the surface. The pressure on Susan was mounting, not just from the police, but from her own conscience. The lie was becoming too heavy to bear. On November 3, 1994, 9 days after she first reported her sons missing, Susan Smith's carefully constructed world came crashing down. The confession did not come in a sterile interrogation room under the glare of harsh fluorescent lights. It came in the quiet solemnity of a local church, a place of sanctuary that would now bear witness to the admission of an unspeakable sin. Cornered by Sheriff Wells and facing the undeniable evidence of her deceit, Susan Smith finally broke. She admitted that the story of the carjacker was a complete fabrication. There had been no black man with a gun, no violent abduction. The fate of her children was a tragedy of her own making. In a handwritten statement, she laid bare the horrifying truth. That night, she had driven her Mazda to a boat ramp at John D. Long Lake. With Michael and Alex asleep in the back, she had gotten out of the car, released the emergency brake, and watched as the vehicle rolled down the incline and into the dark, cold water. She claimed she had intended to die with her sons, that it was a botched suicide attempt born of despair and a confused mind. But as the car slipped beneath the surface, she had stood on the shore, a solitary figure in the darkness, and let them go. Her motivation, as it would later be revealed, was as selfish as her actions were cruel. She had been involved in an affair with a wealthy local man named Tom Finley. Finley had recently ended the relationship, and in a letter found in the submerged car, he had made it clear that he did not want children. "There are some things about you which aren't suited for me," he wrote. "And yes, I am speaking about your children." For Susan Smith, her sons had become an obstacle to the life she so desperately craved, a life with a man who did not want them. And so, in an act of breathtaking cruelty, she had decided to erase them. Following the confession, divers were sent back to John D. Long Lake. This time, they knew what they were looking for and where to look. They found the Mazda submerged in 18 feet of water, about 122 feet from the shore. The scene inside the car was a tableau of horror. The bodies of Michael and Alex were still strapped into their car seats, their small hands pressed against the windows as if in a final, futile attempt to escape. A recreation by investigators would later show that it took approximately 6 minutes for the car to become fully submerged, 6 minutes in which the two little boys would have been conscious, terrified, and slowly drowning. The news of Susan Smith's confession and the discovery of her sons' bodies sent a shockwave through the community of Union and across the nation. The woman who had been the object of so much sympathy was now a figure of revulsion, a modern-day Medea. The yellow ribbons of hope were torn down, replaced by a sense of profound betrayal and a deep, collective grief for the two innocent lives that had been so brutally extinguished. To understand the monstrous act Susan Smith committed, one must look at the fractured landscape of her life, a life marred by trauma, instability, and a desperate yearning for love and acceptance. She was born Susan Vaughn on September 26, 1971. Her childhood was anything but idyllic. When she was just 6 years old, her father committed suicide, a tragedy that cast a long shadow over her formative years. Her mother remarried, but her new husband, Beverly Russell, a prominent local figure in the Republican Party and the Christian Coalition, brought a new kind of horror into Susan's life. He began sexually abusing her when she was a teenager, a dark secret that would remain buried for years. The abuse, combined with the trauma of her father's death, left deep psychological scars. Susan struggled with depression and made her first suicide attempt at the age of 13. After graduating from high school, she attempted suicide a second time after a married man she was involved with ended their affair. She was a young woman adrift, searching for an anchor in a tumultuous sea of emotional pain. In 1991, she married David Smith, and for a time, it seemed as though she might find the stability she so desperately craved. They had 2 sons, Michael and Alex, and on the surface, they were a typical young family. But the marriage was troubled, and by 1994, they had separated. Susan was once again feeling the sting of rejection and abandonment, emotions that had haunted her for most of her life. It was during this period of separation that she began her affair with Tom Finley, the son of the owner of the textile mill where she worked. In Finley, she saw a chance at a different life, a life of wealth and status that was a world away from her own troubled existence. But her children, in her warped perception, stood in the way. The letter from Finley, in which he explicitly stated his desire not to have children, became the catalyst for her horrifying decision. Her defense attorneys would later argue that she was a deeply disturbed woman, suffering from dependent personality disorder and major depression. They would paint a picture of a woman who was not evil, but broken, a victim of a lifetime of trauma who, in a moment of profound despair, had made a tragic and irreversible choice. They would argue that she had intended to die with her sons, that her survival was not an act of self-preservation, but a cruel twist of fate. But for the prosecution, and for much of the public, the explanation was far simpler. Susan Smith was a cold, calculating murderer who had sacrificed her own children for the sake of a man who did not want them. The trial of Susan Smith began on July 18, 1995, in the small town of Union, South Carolina, now the epicenter of a media circus. The world watched as the prosecution and the defense presented their starkly different narratives of what had happened on that fateful October night. The prosecution, led by Solicitor Tommy Pope, portrayed Susan as a manipulative and selfish woman who had committed cold-blooded murder. Pope argued that she had killed her children because they were an inconvenience, an obstacle to her affair with Tom Finley. This case screams out for a verdict of murder, Pope declared in his closing arguments. She chose the love of a man over the love of those boys. He methodically dismantled the defense's theory of a botched suicide, arguing that Susan had ample opportunity to save her children if she had wanted to. The 6 minutes it took for the car to sink, he contended, was more than enough time for her to have a change of heart, to dive in and rescue them. But she had not. She had simply stood by and watched them die. The defense, led by David Bruck and Judy Clark, presented a very different picture of Susan Smith. They argued that she was not a monster, but a deeply troubled woman with a history of mental illness and trauma. They detailed her childhood of abuse, her father's suicide, and her own struggles with depression. They called expert witnesses who testified that she suffered from dependent personality disorder and was in a state of profound despair at the time of the killings. "This is not a case about evil," Clark told the jury. "This is a case about despair and sadness." They argued that Susan had intended to die with her sons, that it was a murder-suicide plan gone awry. They urged the jury to find her guilty of involuntary manslaughter, not murder. The most powerful and emotionally charged testimony came from those who had been directly involved in the case. A diver described the harrowing scene of discovering the boys' bodies, his voice cracking as he recounted seeing a small hand pressed against the car window. Tom Finley took the stand and spoke of his relationship with Susan, admitting that he had ended their affair because of her children. The letter he had written to her was presented as a key piece of evidence, a damning indictment of her motive. Even Susan's stepfather, Beverly Russell, testified, admitting to the sexual abuse and tearfully pleading for the jury to spare her life. "I want you to know you do not have all the guilt in this tragedy," he said, reading from a letter he had written to her in jail. "My heart breaks for what I have done to you." After 10 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. It took them only 2.5 hours to reach a verdict. On July 22, 1995, Susan Smith was found guilty of 2 counts of murder. The penalty phase of the trial would determine whether she would live or die. The prosecution argued for the death penalty, a punishment that many believed she deserved. But the jury, perhaps swayed by the testimony about her troubled past, opted for a life sentence. On July 28, 1995, Susan Smith was sentenced to 2 concurrent life terms in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. For the past 3 decades, Susan Smith has been an inmate at the Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina. Her life in prison has not been without incident. She has had sexual encounters with correctional officers, faced disciplinary action for drug possession, and has been accused of attempting to profit from her story. In letters to the media, she has maintained her innocence, claiming that she was not in her right mind at the time of the killings, and that she is not the monster society perceives me to be. In November 2024, after serving 30 years of her sentence, Susan Smith became eligible for parole. At her parole hearing, conducted via video link, she once again presented herself as a victim, a woman who had been failed by the mental health system and who had found forgiveness in the eyes of God. "I know what I did was horrible," she said, her voice wavering with emotion, "and I would give anything if I could go back and change it. But for the parole board, and for the family she had destroyed, her words of remorse rang hollow." David Smith, the father of the 2 boys she had murdered, spoke at the hearing, his voice thick with a grief that time has not diminished. "I will be here every 2 years going forward to ensure that their death doesn't go in vain," he vowed. The parole board unanimously denied her request for freedom, a decision that was met with a sense of relief and justice by those who have never forgotten the 2 little boys who lost their lives on a cold October night. The case of Susan Smith remains a chilling and cautionary tale. It is a story about the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly ordinary facade, about the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness, and about the capacity for human beings to commit acts of unimaginable cruelty. It is a story that forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the greatest monsters are not strangers in the night, but the people we are supposed to trust the most. And for Michael and Alex Smith, 2 innocent boys whose lives were cut tragically short, it is a story that demands to be remembered, a story that serves as a permanent and heartbreaking memorial to a love that was betrayed in the most brutal way imaginable. Story 2. The city of Reno, Nevada, is a place of dazzling lights and deep shadows, a city where fortunes are won and lost in the blink of an eye. In the winter of 2008, a shadow fell over the city, a darkness that would extinguish a bright and promising light, leaving a community in fear and a family shattered by a grief that would never truly fade. This is the story of Brianna Dennison, a young woman whose life was stolen in the dead of night, and the relentless pursuit of the monster who took her. Brianna was a girl on the cusp of a brilliant future. At 19 years old, she was a sophomore at Santa Barbara City College, studying psychology, her mind as vibrant as her spirit. She had returned to her hometown of Reno for the winter break, a time for family, friends, and the familiar comforts of home. The Martin Luther King Jr. weekend was a time of celebration, and Brianna, along with her friends, had attended events organized by a student travel agency. The night of January 19, 2008, was filled with the laughter and energy of youth, a night that held no hint of the darkness that was about to descend. After a night out, Brianna and her friends returned to a friend's house on McKay Court, a quiet residential street near the University of Nevada, Reno. Brianna, tired from the night's festivities, curled up on a couch in the living room, pulling a blanket over her and using a soft, brown teddy bear as a pillow. The house was filled with the easy camaraderie of friends, a safe haven from the cold January night. The front door was left unlocked, a small, seemingly insignificant detail that would have catastrophic consequences. The morning of January 20th dawned with a cold, gray light. Brianna's friend awoke around 9 a.m. and found the house strangely quiet. Brianna was gone. A flicker of unease, a small, cold knot of worry, began to form in her friend's stomach. Brianna's purse, cell phone, and shoes were still in the house. She wouldn't have left without them. Panic began to set in. As her friend looked closer at the couch where Brianna had been sleeping, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 2 small spots of blood and a small spatter stained the pillow. A frantic call was made to Brianna's mother, Bridget. The words tumbled out, a torrent of fear and confusion. "Brianna's gone. There's blood on the pillow." Bridget's world tilted on its axis. She rushed to the house, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The scene that greeted her was a parent's worst nightmare. The police were called, and the house on McKay Court was transformed from a home into a crime scene. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of activity. The blood on the pillow was confirmed to be Brianna's. The blanket she had been sleeping with was found in the kitchen, a strange and unsettling displacement. The brown teddy bear she had been using as a pillow was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken windows or forced entry. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. But the blood on the pillow told a different story. This was not a voluntary disappearance. This was an abduction. The Reno Police Department, led by Lieutenant Robert McDonald, launched a massive investigation. The local search and rescue teams were called in, and officers went door to door, their questions hanging in the cold winter air. The friends who had been in the house that night were interviewed, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and disbelief. All were quickly ruled out as suspects. The forensic team meticulously combed the house for clues. The back doorknob was swabbed for DNA, and the results came back with an unknown male profile. The bloodstains on the pillow were analyzed, revealing a horrifying detail. The blood was mixed with saliva and mucus, and there were also mascara stains. Forensic pathologists concluded that Brianna had suffered an actively bleeding injury to her mouth, nose, or throat, and that her face had been pressed hard against the pillow. The image was sickening, a silent testament to a brutal and violent struggle. The discovery of the unknown male DNA on the doorknob was a crucial breakthrough. It was a ghost's fingerprint, a spectral trace of the man who had slipped into the house under the cover of darkness. The DNA was run through the national database, and the results sent a chill through the investigative team. The DNA profile matched that of a predator who had been terrorizing the area for months. The first attack had occurred in October 2007. A woman had been raped at gunpoint in a parking garage on the University of Nevada, Reno campus. The victim, terrified and traumatized, had not reported the crime. The second attack came on November 13, 2007, followed by a third on December 16, 2007. In both cases, the victims were sexually assaulted, and the attacker had taken their underwear as a macabre trophy. The DNA evidence linked all 3 attacks to the same unknown assailant. The police now knew they were not just searching for a missing person, they were hunting a serial rapist. The city of Reno was gripped by fear. The news of a serial predator on the loose spread like wildfire, and the community was mobilized. Over 1,700 volunteers, including Nevada's then First Lady, Dawn Gibbons, joined the search for Brianna, scouring a 100-square-mile area. Billboards with Brianna's smiling face were erected across the city, her eyes a silent plea for help. Her family, a tight-knit and loving group, clung to a fragile thread of hope, their lives a torturous limbo of waiting and praying. Days turned into weeks, and the hope began to fade, replaced by a gnawing dread. The winter snows fell, blanketing the city in a shroud of white, and the search for Brianna became more difficult. On February 15, 2008, 26 days after she had vanished, the search came to a devastating end. Alberto Jimenez, a worker at a local technology company, was walking back to his office after his lunch break. He was taking a shortcut through a field near a business park in South Reno when he saw something that caught his eye. A flash of bright orange, a color that seemed out of place in the muted tones of the winter landscape. As he got closer, he realized the orange fabric was a pair of socks attached to a pair of feet. He thought at first it was a mannequin, a macabre prank. But as he drew nearer, the horrifying reality of what he was seeing began to dawn on him. It was a body, partially concealed beneath a discarded Christmas tree. Jimenez, who did not have a cell phone, ran back to his office and called the police. The scene was quickly cordoned off, and the grim task of identifying the body began. It was Brianna Dennison. The autopsy revealed the full horror of what she had endured. She had been raped and strangled. The cause of death was asphyxiation by a thin cord. The likely murder weapon, a detail that was both bizarre and sickening, was a pair of lacy pink thong panties that had been found near her body. She had been found wearing only her bright orange socks. The body had been in the field for over a week, its discovery delayed by the recent heavy snowfall. The discovery of Brianna's body was a crushing blow to her family and the community. The fragile hope that she might be found alive was extinguished, replaced by a profound and all-encompassing grief. But for the police, the discovery also provided a wealth of new evidence. 2 pairs of thong underwear had been found with Brianna's body. One was the pair used to strangle her. The other, a chilling discovery, belonged to her friend Katie, one of the women who had been in the house on the night of the abduction. This meant the killer had not just snatched Brianna from the couch. He had moved through the house, undetected, from room to room, a phantom in the night, searching for his victim. The audacity of the act was breathtaking. The DNA found on Brianna's body matched the DNA from the doorknob and the previous sexual assaults. The police now had a clear profile of their killer, a serial rapist who had escalated to murder. A police sketch of the suspect, based on descriptions from the previous victims, was released to the public. The hunt for the Phantom of McKay Court was on. The investigation moved into a new phase, a painstaking process of following up on leads, interviewing witnesses, and trying to put a name to the face in the sketch. Months passed, and the case grew cold. The fear in the community began to subside, replaced by a lingering sense of unease. But for Brianna's family, there was no moving on. They were trapped in a nightmare, and they would not rest until justice was served. Her mother, Bridget, founded the Bring Bree Justice Foundation, a testament to her unwavering determination to find her daughter's killer. The break in the case came in November 2008, 10 months after Brianna's abduction. It came from an unlikely source, a friend of the killer's girlfriend. The girlfriend had confided in her friend that she had found a pair of thong underwear in her boyfriend's truck that did not belong to her. The friend, her suspicions aroused by the widespread media coverage of the case, a police sketch of the suspect, and a description of the vehicle used in one of the previous rapes, made a call to the secret witness program. The man she named was James Michael Bila. Bila, a 27-year-old former Marine, was living in Sparks, a city just east of Reno. He had a 4-year-old son with his girlfriend. He had a prior arrest in 2001 for threatening his ex-girlfriend's neighbor with a knife, a red flag that had been overlooked. The detectives, acting on the tip, questioned Bila. He denied any involvement in Brianna's murder and refused to provide a DNA sample. It was a dead end, or so it seemed. The detectives, undeterred, approached Bila's girlfriend. She gave them permission to take a DNA sample from her 4-year-old son. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead they had. The results came back, and they were a game changer. The DNA from the boy indicated that his direct paternal relative was the man who had left his DNA at the scene of Brianna's abduction and the other rapes. The Phantom of McKay Court finally had a name, James Bila. With this evidence, the police obtained a warrant for Bila's arrest and a warrant for his DNA. On November 12, 2008, Bila was arrested while dropping his son off at a daycare center. His DNA was collected, and the results were a perfect match. The case against him was now airtight. The police also learned that Bila had sold his truck in Idaho, a truck that matched the description of the vehicle used in one of the previous rapes. The truck was tracked down and brought back to Reno, a key piece of evidence in the case against him. The trial of James Bila began in May 2010. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Dick Gammick and his deputy, Elliot Sattler, laid out a chilling case against him. They presented the DNA evidence, the testimony of the surviving rape victims, and the horrifying details of Brianna's abduction and murder. The jury, a panel of 8 women and 6 men, listened in stunned silence as the story of Bila's reign of terror unfolded. The defense attorneys argued that Bila had been a productive member of society before his crimes, and that he had suffered a traumatic childhood, with an alcoholic father who was abusive to his mother. They argued for life in prison without the possibility of parole. But the jury was not swayed. After just 6 hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts: kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The penalty phase of the trial began almost immediately. The prosecution sought the death penalty, arguing that Bila was a serial rapist and a continuing threat to society. The jury agreed. James Bila was sentenced to death. He was also given 4 additional life sentences for the other attacks. The verdict brought a sense of closure to a community that had lived in fear for so long. But for Brianna's family, the pain would never truly go away. They had lost a daughter, a sister, a friend. Her life, so full of promise, had been extinguished in a senseless act of violence. The murder of Brianna Dennison was a tragedy that shook the city of Reno to its core. But it also brought out the best in the community. The outpouring of support for Brianna's family, the thousands of volunteers who joined the search, and the relentless determination of the police to bring her killer to justice were a testament to the power of a community united in the face of darkness. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Brianna's law was passed in Nevada, a law that requires anyone arrested for a felony to provide a DNA sample. It is a legacy that will help to prevent future tragedies, a small ray of light in the darkness of a story that will forever be a part of Reno's history. The story of Brianna Dennison is a story of a life cut short, of a family's unbearable grief, and of a community's unwavering resolve. It is a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most ordinary of places, and of the importance of vigilance, of community, and of never giving up hope for justice. Brianna's light was extinguished on that cold January night, but her memory lives on, a symbol of innocence lost and a testament to the enduring power of love and remembrance. The phantom of McKay Court is behind bars, his reign of terror over. But the shadow he cast will forever linger over the city of Reno, a chilling reminder of the night a monster slipped through an unlocked door and stole a precious life. Story 3. The silence in the Mesa, Arizona. Home was the first thing that felt wrong. Travis Alexander, a man whose life was a symphony of motivational speeches, conference calls, and the boisterous laughter he shared with friends, had gone quiet. It was June 9, 2008. For 5 days, calls had gone to voicemail and texts had remained unanswered. His friends, a tight-knit group bound by faith and camaraderie, felt a knot of anxiety tightening with each passing hour. They knew Travis was supposed to be heading to Cancun for a company trip, a reward for his success as a salesman for prepaid legal services, but it was unlike him to vanish completely. A small group of them decided to go to his house. His roommates, who had seen little of him, assumed he had left early for his trip, but the friends who knew him best suspected something was amiss. They found a key and let themselves into his bedroom, a space that was usually a testament to his organized, ambitious life. What they found instead was the prelude to a nightmare. Dark, ominous pools of blood stained the hallway carpet leading to the master bathroom. Pushing the bathroom door open, they were met with a scene of unimaginable horror. Sprawled in the shower stall was the body of Travis Alexander. The 911 call captured their shock and dawning grief. When the dispatcher asked if anyone might have been angry enough to hurt him, a name was offered without hesitation: Jodi Arias. To his friends, she was a specter that had haunted Travis's life, a beautiful, intense ex-girlfriend whose presence lingered long after their official breakup. They spoke of her stalking him, of her slashing his tires, of her accessing his social media accounts. They didn't know the half of it. What had unfolded in that bathroom 5 days earlier was a crescendo of obsession and violence that would soon transfix a nation. Travis Alexander had been stabbed nearly 30 times, and he had been shot in the head. The attack was a frenzy of brutality. A medical examiner would later testify that his jugular vein, common carotid artery, and windpipe had all been severed. Defensive wounds on his hands told the story of a desperate fight for his life. The cause of death was officially ruled a homicide due to excessive blood loss from his many wounds. When Mesa Police Detective Esteban Flores arrived, he stepped into a crime scene that was both chaotic and strangely curated. The violence was explosive, yet someone had made an effort to clean up. Linens had been run through the laundry, and in the washing machine, investigators made the single most important discovery of the case: a digital camera. It was waterlogged and broken, a deliberate attempt to destroy whatever secrets it held. But in the digital age, ghosts are not so easily exorcised. Forensic technicians painstakingly worked to recover the data from the damaged memory card. As the images materialized on their screens, they revealed the final, terrifying hours of Travis Alexander's life. The photos, taken on June 4th, began innocently enough. There were suggestive pictures of Jodi Arias and Travis, a portrait of the passionate and volatile relationship they had shared. Then, the timeline took a dark turn. The last photo of Travis alive was captured at 5:29 p.m., showing him in the shower, vulnerable and unaware. Moments later, the camera captured a series of horrifying images. A photo taken accidentally, pointing at the ceiling. Another showing a person, believed to be Travis, bleeding profusely on the bathroom floor. A story of intimacy had morphed into a record of a slaughter. The camera did more than just document the murder. It placed the killer at the scene. Along with the photos, investigators found a bloody palm print on the hallway wall. It contained a mixture of DNA, Travis Alexander's and Jodi Arias's. The case against her began to solidify. Jodi Arias was an aspiring photographer from California who had met Travis Alexander at a work conference in Las Vegas in 2006. He was a charismatic Mormon and a rising star in his company. She was captivated. Their connection was immediate and intense. She converted to his faith, and he baptized her himself in a ceremony in Southern California. They began a long-distance relationship that was a whirlwind of passion, religious devotion, and tempestuous conflict. Friends of Travis viewed her with suspicion, describing the relationship as tumultuous and her behavior as worryingly obsessive. Though they officially broke up, their connection never truly severed, continuing as a series of sexual encounters that kept her tethered to his life. When detectives first contacted Arias, she was the picture of innocence. She claimed she hadn't been in Mesa on the day of the murder and hadn't seen Travis since April. But the evidence told a different story. Investigators traced her journey. She had rented a car and, instead of taking the direct route from her home in Yreka, California, to a planned meeting with another man, Ryan Burns, in Utah, she had made a significant detour to Mesa, Arizona. To cover her tracks, she had turned off her cell phone for a long stretch of the drive and had even flipped her license plate upside down at one point. She had brought with her multiple gas cans, filling them up to avoid leaving a paper trail of credit card receipts along the clandestine route. When she arrived at Ryan Burns's house a day after the murder, he noted that her once blonde hair was now a dark brown and that she had cuts on her hands. She explained the injuries away with a flimsy story about breaking glass while working at a Margaritaville restaurant, a restaurant that detectives later confirmed did not exist. She acted, in Burns's words, normal. She went to business meetings and socialized, all while Travis Alexander's body lay cooling in his shower hundreds of miles away. On her drive back to California, she called Travis's phone multiple times, leaving voicemails, even accessing his voicemail system, a calculated performance of a concerned friend. When she returned the rental car, it had been driven nearly 3,000 miles. The floor mats were missing, and the rental clerk noted red stains on the seats, though the car was cleaned before police could test them. Faced with the irrefutable DNA and photographic evidence, Arias's story changed. She abandoned her initial denial and spun a new tale. Now she admitted she was there, but claimed two masked intruders had broken in, murdered Travis, and attacked her. It was a desperate, cinematic lie that no one believed. Finally, 2 years after her arrest, her story shifted a final time. She confessed to killing him, but insisted it was in self-defense, painting Travis as a violent abuser and herself as a battered woman forced to fight for her life. On July 9, 2008, her 28th birthday, Jodi Arias was indicted by a grand jury for the first-degree murder of Travis Alexander. She was arrested at her grandparents' home 6 days later and extradited to Arizona, where she pleaded not guilty. While in jail awaiting trial, she gave an interview to Inside Edition, her confidence unwavering. "No jury is going to convict me," she declared. "I am innocent, and you can mark my words on that." The trial began on January 2, 2013, in the Maricopa County Superior Court. It would quickly devolve from a legal proceeding into a national spectacle, a 21st-century true crime drama broadcast live to a captivated and often horrified public. The courtroom became a theater, and the players took their roles with dramatic flair. On one side was prosecutor Juan Martinez, a diminutive but bulldog-like attorney whose aggressive, theatrical style would make him a controversial cult figure. In his opening statement, he painted a simple, damning picture of Jodi Arias as a jealous stalker who had meticulously planned Travis's murder after he tried to end their relationship for good. He contended she had stolen a .25 caliber pistol from her grandparents' home, the same caliber as a casing found at the crime scene, and driven to Arizona with the sole purpose of killing the man who had rejected her. On the other side were her defense attorneys, Kirk Nurmi and Jennifer Wilmot, who faced the unenviable task of defending a woman the public had already condemned. They argued that their client was not a monster, but a victim. They portrayed Travis Alexander as a physically and emotionally abusive man with dark appetites, a man who, on the day of his death, had lunged at her in anger, forcing her to defend herself. The trial was a maelstrom of sex, lies, and graphic violence. The prosecution methodically laid out its evidence: the bloody palm print, the recovered photos, the gas cans, the lies to police. But the trial's center of gravity, the vortex around which everything spun, was Jodi Arias herself. On February 4, 2013, she took the witness stand in her own defense. She would remain there for an unprecedented 18 days. What followed was a marathon of testimony that was part confession, part performance art. Arias detailed her tumultuous relationship with Alexander in excruciatingly graphic detail. She spoke of their sex life, and the court listened to a recorded phone sex call in which the lurid fantasies of both parties were laid bare. She accused Alexander of being a closet pedophile and claimed she had tried to help him with his supposed urges. She recounted alleged instances of physical abuse, at one point holding up her left hand to show the jury a crooked finger she claimed was the result of blocking a kick from him. Then, she described the day of the killing. According to her, they had been taking photos when she dropped his expensive new camera. She claimed this sent him into a rage, that he body-slammed her and charged at her, forcing her to run to his closet, grab a gun from the top shelf, and fire in a panic. When asked about the stabbing, the nearly 30 wounds that followed the single gunshot, her memory conveniently failed her. She claimed she blacked out, that she had no recollection of the frenzied knife attack. A defense expert would later testify that she suffered from PTSD and amnesia, a fight or flight response to trauma that prevented her brain from retaining the memories of the slaughter. Juan Martinez's cross-examination was relentless. He hammered away at the inconsistencies in her stories, her selective memory, and the sheer logistical improbability of her self-defense claim. The trial became a circus. It was streamed live online, and a global audience weighed in on social media. Trial junkies lined up every morning, vying for the limited seats in the courtroom gallery. Martinez signed autographs outside the courthouse, while Nurmi and Wilmot received death threats. Witnesses became fearful of testifying. The line between justice and entertainment blurred into non-existence. The battle of the expert witnesses was a clinical dissection of a broken psyche. The defense put forward a psychotherapist, Alice Laviolette, who specialized in domestic violence and testified that Arias was a classic victim, too ashamed and humiliated to have told anyone about the abuse. The prosecution countered with their own clinical psychologist, Janine DeMarte, who diagnosed Arias not with PTSD, but with borderline personality disorder, arguing she was not a victim of abuse but a manipulative liar. In his closing argument, Martinez held up the gruesome crime scene photos for the jury to see one last time. He called Arias a manipulative liar and the killing a slaughter, re-emphasizing the sheer number and variety of Travis's wounds. The defense pleaded with the jury to look past their personal dislike for their client and see the act as a desperate response to abuse, arguing the prosecution's premeditation theory didn't make any sense. On May 8, 2013, after more than 15 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. The courtroom was electric with anticipation. As the foreman read the words "guilty of first-degree murder," Travis Alexander's family wept and embraced. Outside, the crowd that had gathered erupted in cheers. Jodi Arias, the woman who had once boasted that no jury would ever convict her, sat stone-faced. But the trial was not over. The conviction made her eligible for the death penalty, and the proceedings moved into the penalty phase. The prosecution had to prove that the murder was committed in an especially cruel manner. A medical examiner testified again about the nature of the wounds, and Martinez had the jury sit in silence for 2 minutes to illustrate the terrifying length of time he claimed it took for Travis to die. The jury quickly agreed the murder was cruel, and the final phase began, to decide between life in prison and death. Travis's siblings took the stand to deliver heart-wrenching victim impact statements, their voices thick with grief as they described the void his murder had left in their lives. Then, on May 21st, it was Jodi Arias's turn to speak. In a bizarre and rambling plea for her life, she reversed her earlier statements to a reporter that she preferred death. "Each time I said that, I meant it, but I lack perspective," she told the jury. She held up a white t-shirt with the word "survivor" printed on it, promising to sell them from prison and donate the proceeds to victims of domestic abuse. She pledged to donate her hair to Locks of Love. It was a final, desperate performance, but it was enough to sway at least one juror. On May 23rd, the jury announced they were deadlocked, unable to reach a unanimous decision on the death penalty. The vote was 8-4 in favor of death. The judge was forced to declare a mistrial in the sentencing phase. A new jury was impaneled for a second sentencing retrial, which began in October 2014. Again, the arguments were made, the evidence presented, the life or death decision weighed. And again, the jury deadlocked. On March 5, 2015, after 26 hours of deliberation, the judge declared a second mistrial. The final vote had been 11-1 in favor of the death penalty. Under Arizona law, Jodi Arias could not be tried for her life a third time. The death penalty was officially off the table. On April 13, 2015, nearly 7 years after she had slaughtered Travis Alexander in his shower, Jodi Arias stood before Judge Sherry Stevens for her final sentence. The judge had two options: life with the possibility of parole after 25 years, or life without the possibility of parole. Stevens chose the latter. Jodi Arias was sentenced to natural life in prison. There would be no escape. She was sent to the Arizona State Prison Complex Perryville, where she remains today, her name now synonymous with one of the most sensational and sordid murder cases in modern American history. The appeals her lawyers filed were denied, the courts upholding the conviction based on the overwhelming evidence of her guilt, despite acknowledging the egregious misconduct of the prosecutor who put her away. The case that had captivated millions was finally over, leaving behind a legacy of shattered families, a tarnished legal system, and the chilling memory of the bloody photos recovered from a broken camera and a washing machine. Story 4. The spring of 2001 had unfolded in Chevy Chase with the gentle predictability of a neighborhood where manicured lawns stretched like green carpets under the shade of ancient oaks, and the air carried the faint, sweet tang of blooming azaleas. Drummond Avenue, a quiet artery in this affluent Maryland enclave, just beyond the Washington, D.C. border, was a place where families like the Preers had put down roots, building lives intertwined with the rhythms of school plays, weekend barbecues, and the steady hum of professional ambitions. It was a street of brick colonials and tidy driveways, where neighbors waved over hedges and children biked without fear under the watchful eyes of parents who believed the world outside their gates was a distant, manageable threat. Leslie Jennings Prior, at 50, embodied the warmth and quiet strength that anchored such a home. Born into a sprawling Southern family, the eighth of 9 children, with 7 siblings who dotted the landscape from Florida to scattered points north, she had grown up in the sun-drenched sprawl of Pensacola, where the Gulf's salty breeze shaped her early days. The Jennings household was a cacophony of laughter and lessons, her parents instilling in their brood a reverence for education and community that Leslie carried like a talisman. She was the thoughtful one, the girl who devoured books in the shade of live oaks, her imagination fueled by stories of far-off places, even as she navigated the close-knit chaos of a large family. High school at Pensacola High brought her the first stirrings of independence, and college at the University of Florida sealed it. There, amid the humid haze of Gainesville, she studied journalism, her notebooks filling with crisp prose and half-formed dreams of reporting from the front lines of change. But it was in a marketing class that she met Carl Prior, known to all as Sandy, a lanky economics major with a quick laugh and eyes that crinkled at the corners when he teased her about her endless supply of highlighters. Sandy, from a more reserved Midwestern stock, found in Leslie a spark that lit up his orderly world. Their courtship was unhurried. Stolen glances in lecture halls, late-night study sessions that dissolved into debates over coffee, and finally, a proposal under the Spanish moss-draped branches of a campus oak. They married young, in a ceremony that blended Southern charm with Sandy's understated elegance, and settled into a rhythm that felt eternal. Their only child, Lauren, arrived in the late 1970s, a bright-eyed girl with her mother's dark curls and her father's thoughtful gaze. By 1982, the Priors had migrated north, drawn by career opportunities to the polished corridors of Chevy Chase. They purchased a 2-story brick home at 4824 Drummond Avenue, a gracious structure with white shutters framing tall windows and a front porch that begged for rocking chairs. Leslie, ever the adapter, dove into the role of suburban matriarch with grace. She worked as a production manager at Specialties Incorporated, an advertising firm in Northwest D.C., where her organizational prowess turned chaotic deadlines into seamless successes. Evenings found her volunteering at the local library, teaching English as a second language to immigrants with the same patient enthusiasm she brought to everything. Sandy, meanwhile, climbed the ranks in marketing, his steady presence a counterpoint to Leslie's effervescence. He was the planner, the one who mapped family vacations to the Outer Banks or weekend hikes in Shenandoah, always with a cooler stocked and a playlist of folk tunes humming from the car stereo. Their marriage wasn't without its shadows. Sandy later confided to investigators that Leslie's occasional bouts of heavy drinking could cast a pall over quiet nights, turning her laughter brittle and her words sharp. He admitted to lingering at the office those evenings, not out of resentment, but a quiet exhaustion born of love stretched thin. Yet, on balance, theirs was a union of deep affection, the kind that weathers storms because the harbors it offers feel irreplaceable. Lauren, their pride and anchor, blossomed in the Bethesda Chevy Chase high school orbit, a poised teenager with a circle of friends as tight-knit as the neighborhood itself. At 15, she met Eugene Theodore Gliger, a boy from a nearby school whose easy charm masked a turbulent undercurrent. Eugene was the son of Romanian immigrants, his family having fled the iron grip of Ceausescu's regime in the late 1980s, trading Bucharest's grey sprawl for the promise of American reinvention. He arrived in Chevy Chase with a faint accent that charmed classmates and a restless energy that drew him to soccer fields and late-night drives. To the Priors, he was a welcome addition, polite at dinner tables, quick with a joke during family game nights, and seemingly smitten with Lauren in that all-consuming way of high school romances. Leslie, in particular, took to Eugene. She saw in him echoes of her own family's immigrant grit, though the Jennings were generations removed from such journeys, and she opened her home wide. He joined them on outings, A spring break trip to Florida, where he helped Sandy grill fresh-caught fish. Or lazy afternoons at the pool, where Leslie pressed plates of her famous lemon bars into his hands. "He's got a good heart," she'd say to Lauren, her voice soft with maternal approval. Sandy was more reserved, sensing perhaps the flicker of mischief in Eugene's eyes. The skipped classes, the whispers of parties that veered into trouble, but he deferred to Leslie's warmth. Lauren and Eugene dated for 5 years, a teenage saga of proms and heart-to-hearts, until the inevitable drift of young adulthood pulled them apart in 1998. Eugene, then 19, headed to college in D.C., his path veering toward the city's vibrant underbelly, while Lauren stayed local, pursuing studies at the University of Maryland. By 2001, the breakup was a faded memory, the kind that surfaces only in old photo albums. Eugene had slipped from the Prier's orbit, though not entirely forgotten. He was building a life in Washington, odd jobs giving way to a position at a tech firm, nights spent in Adams Morgan bars nursing ambitions he kept vague. Substance use, cocaine mostly in sporadic binges, lurked at the edges, a demon he wrestled in solitude, born of adolescent experiments that had hardened into habit. Yet to those who knew him superficially, he was the gregarious guy at happy hours, the one with stories of Bucharest markets and a laugh that filled rooms. On the evening of May 1st, 2001, Drummond Avenue settled into twilight with its usual serenity. Leslie, home from a day of wrangling ad proofs, poured herself a glass of Chardonnay in the kitchen, the golden liquid catching the light from the window over the sink. Sandy had left for work early that morning, kissing her forehead with a murmured "love you," before heading to his office in Bethesda. Lauren, now 21 and living on campus but visiting often, had called earlier, promising to swing by for dinner later in the week. The house hummed with domestic normalcy, a load of laundry tumbling in the dryer, the faint scent of Leslie's jasmine perfume lingering from her morning routine. Across town, Eugene Gligor navigated a different dusk. The day had unraveled for him in a haze of restlessness, a marketing meeting at his firm dissolving into frustration, followed by a text from an old acquaintance suggesting drinks. By nightfall, he was deep into a binge, cocaine lines snorted in a dimly lit apartment, chased with whiskey that burned away inhibitions. His mind, fogged and fractious, circled back to old wounds. The sting of the breakup with Lauren, the ache of feeling unmoored in a city that demanded constant reinvention. Why he turned his car toward Chevy Chase that night remains a void, a question that would haunt investigators and family alike. No grudge festered against Leslie. If anything, her kindness had been a rare balm. Perhaps it was impulse, a misdirected fury seeking familiar ground. Or maybe, in the alchemy of drugs and despair, the past simply clawed its way forward, demanding reckoning. The clock struck just past 9 when Eugene's sedan eased to a stop on a side street off Drummond. The neighborhood was still, porch lights flickering on like hesitant stars. He approached the Prier home on foot, his steps unsteady but deliberate, the night's shadows cloaking his approach. The front door yielded to his knock, or perhaps it was unlocked, a casual oversight in a place where trust was the default. Leslie, midway through a chapter in her living room armchair, looked up with a smile that faltered only slightly. "Eugene," she said, rising, her voice a mix of surprise and pleasure. "What brings you here so late?" He mumbled something about needing to talk to Lauren, a lie that tumbled out unbidden, his eyes darting past her into the warmly lit foyer. Leslie, ever the gracious host, stepped aside. "She's not here tonight, but come in. Can I get you some coffee? Water?" Her tone was light, maternal, the same she'd used when he'd shown up unannounced years before, disheveled from a soccer game. She led him toward the kitchen, her bare feet padding softly on the hardwood, oblivious to the storm brewing behind his polite nod. What happened next unfolded in a blur of violence that shattered the home's fragile peace. In the foyer, steps from the living room's sanctuary, Eugene's composure cracked. Words were exchanged, perhaps a plea for understanding, a garbled confession of lingering pain, but they escalated into something primal. Leslie, sensing the shift too late, turned toward him with concern etching her features. "Eugene, are you all right? Talk to me." Her hand reached out, a gesture of comfort that ignited whatever fuse had been smoldering. He lunged, his hands closing around her throat in a grip fueled by panic and rage. She gasped, her nails raking his arms in desperate defense, drawing blood that smeared across her skin and his. The struggle propelled them backward, Leslie's head slamming against the foyer floor with a sickening thud. Once, twice, 3 times, each impact a thunderclap in the empty house, her body convulsing as consciousness ebbed. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and viscous, staining the cream-colored rug her mother had woven decades ago. Eugene, his breath ragged, released his hold only when her struggles ceased, her eyes staring blankly at the ceiling fan's lazy spin. Panic surged then, a tidal wave that drowned reason. He staggered to his feet, hands trembling as he wiped at the blood, his own, hers, smearing it further across the walls, the banister, the pristine surfaces of a life interrupted. In a haze, he dragged her limp form upstairs, the effort Herculean, her weight a dead burden in his arms. The master bathroom shower stall became his makeshift shroud. He crammed her inside, twisting the faucet to full cold, watching as water cascaded over her, diluting the crimson rivulets that swirled down the drain. It was a futile ritual of concealment, born of terror, as if the rush could erase the irrevocable. He fled then, slipping out the back door into the night, his car vanishing into the DC sprawl before the first neighbor stirred. The house fell silent, save for the drip-drip of the faucet echoing like a metronome of guilt. Morning broke clear and unremarkable on May 2nd, the sun gilding the azaleas anew. At Specialties Incorporated, Leslie's desk sat empty by 10 a.m., her chair pushed in neatly, a half-finished proof sheet awaiting her red pen. Her colleague, Mary Reedy, glanced at the clock, then dialed the Prier home. No answer. Worry gnawed. Leslie was punctual to a fault, her absences as rare as snow in July. By 11:30, Reedy called Sandy at his office. "She didn't show," she said, voice tight. "Something's wrong." Sandy, mid-conversation with a client, felt a chill uncoil in his gut. He left immediately, Reedy insisting on riding along. "In case it's nothing, just a flat tire." The drive to Drummond Avenue was a tense blur, Sandy's hands white-knuckled on the wheel. They pulled into the driveway at 11:43 a.m., the house facade serene, curtains drawn against the light. Reedy rapped on the front door, silence. Sandy fished out his key, the metal jangling like alarm bells. "Leslie," he called, stepping inside. The foyer hit them first. The metallic tang of blood, sharp and accusatory, mingled with the faint floral of her perfume. They moved as one, hearts hammering, calling her name up the stairs. In the master bathroom, the shower ran cold, a steady hiss that masked the horror until Sandy wrenched the door open. There she lay, curled in the stall, water pooling around her face bruised and swollen, eyes vacant. Reedy stifled a scream, fumbling for her phone to dial 911. "My friend's not at work," she stammered to the dispatcher, voice breaking. "We came to check. Oh God, she's in the shower, there's blood everywhere." In the background, Sandy's voice cracked. "Leslie? Les? No, please." Police arrived minutes later, the wail of sirens shattering the avenue's hush. Officers cordoned the scene, their boots tracking faint red prints across the tile. The foyer was a tableau of chaos, blood spatter arcing up the walls like abstract strokes, a lamp toppled, the rug saturated. Upstairs, the shower's grim staging suggested a killer's clumsy cover-up, water still trickling, Leslie's nightgown torn and sodden. The medical examiner's preliminary word was blunt, manual strangulation compounded by blunt force trauma to the head. She'd fought hard, scrapes on her palms, skin under her nails that would yield unknown male DNA. No signs of sexual assault, no forced entry. This was intimate, personal, a storm that had brewed from within the home's circle. Word spread like wildfire through Chevy Chase. Neighbors gathered in hushed clusters, their faces pale masks of disbelief. "Leslie? Sweet Leslie who helped with the block party?" one murmured, clutching a sweater against the sudden chill. The Jennings siblings mobilized from afar. Flights booked, calls chaining across time zones, their shared grief a lifeline in the void. Lauren, roused from a lecture hall by a campus payphone call from her father, collapsed against the booth's glass, the receiver slipping from numb fingers. "Mom," she whispered, the world tilting. She raced home, arriving as detectives milled in the driveway, their notepads filling with questions that had no shape yet. Sandy bore the initial brunt, his shock hardening into a stoic facade as he recounted the morning's routine to lead Detective Maria Allen. "I left at 7:45, kissed her goodbye. She was in her robe, coffee in hand. Said she'd see me that night." His voice held steady, but his eyes betrayed the fracture, the what-ifs already circling like vultures. Allen, a veteran with a gentle probe, noted the strain in the marriage, the late nights, the drinking, but filed it away. Spousal suspicion was protocol in these cases, a shadow that fell unfairly on the grieving. Polygraphs followed, voluntary and exonerating, Sandy's results as clean as his alibi. The investigation bloomed into a frenzy. Canvases turned up oddities. A neighbor who'd noticed every light blazing in the Preer home the night before, curtains drawn tight against the dark, a deviation from Leslie's habit of early bedtimes. Another recalled a car idling briefly on the block around 9 p.m., but details blurred in memory's fog. Crime scene tech swabbed meticulously, blood drops in the foyer, a partial print on the banister smudged beyond utility, fibers from a dark jacket snagged on the doorframe. The DNA under Leslie's nails was the golden thread, male unknown, a profile entered into Cody's that yielded no hits. Interviews cascaded, colleagues praising Leslie's unflappable calm, friends recounting her volunteer zeal, family weaving a tapestry of a woman whose kindness was her hallmark. As weeks bled into months, the frenzy ebbed. Sandy returned to work, his suits hanging looser on a frame thinned by insomnia. He and Lauren clung to each other, dinners a ritual of shared stories. Leslie's laughter at bad puns, her ritual of pressing wildflowers in books. But whispers infiltrated. At the grocery, sidelong glances. At PDA meetings, Sandy's isolation deepened by unspoken doubt. Husband did it. A neighbor confided to another, the trope as old as headlines. Sandy felt it like a weight, his grief compounded by isolation. He sought counseling, the therapist's couch a confessional for the marriage's fractures, Leslie's drinking, his retreats, but nothing that explained the monster who'd entered their home. Lauren, meanwhile, navigated college in a fog, her grades slipping as nightmares replayed the imagined scene. Her mother's final moments, the terror in her eyes. She dated sporadically, each suitor measured against an impossible standard, but trust eroded like sandcastles at tide. The Jennings clan rallied, siblings descending for holidays, their numbers a buffer against the quiet house's echoes. Yet the absence gnawed, Leslie's chair empty at Thanksgiving, her recipe cards yellowing in a drawer. Years turned the case cold, a file boxed in the Montgomery County Police Department's basement, dusted only by the occasional audit. Detectives rotated out, leads ossified into dead ends. By 2022, the cold case unit stirred. Detectives Tara Augustine and Allison DePoy, fresh to the division, pulled the Preer file on a hunch, their eyes snagging on the DNA profile's unyielding silence. Maryland law had evolved. Judicial approval for forensic genetic genealogy, FGGS, came swiftly from Judge Cheryl McCallie on September 1st. The blood swab, preserved in evidentiary limbo, winged its way to Othram Incorporated, a Texas lab pioneering the dark art of ancestral tracing. Weeks later, results pinged back, a partial family tree branching from a distant Romanian relative in Family Tree DNA's database. The surname Gliger leaped out, a ghost from the tip's log. DePoy cross-referenced, Eugene Theodore Gliger, DOB November 9, 1979. The ex-boyfriend, unswabbed, unprobed. Heart rate spiked in the squad room. They tracked him, D.C. address, airport security badge for his consulting gigs. On June 9, 2024, at Dulles International, Augustine and DePoy staged their trap. Posing as lost travelers, they bumped into him at a gate, chatting idly as he sipped water from a plastic bottle. Flight delayed again, one sighed. Eugene commiserated, finishing the drink before discarding it in a bin. Detectives swooped post-departure, gloved hands retrieving the vessel. Lab confirmation hit like lightning. Direct match to the foyer blood, the nail clippings. The unknown male was known, after all. The arrest warrant flew through channels, signed June 15th. On June 18th, U.S. Marshals stormed Eugene's Colorama apartment, cuffing him mid-morning coffee. "You're under arrest for the murder of Leslie Preer," the lead marshal intoned, as Eugene's face drained of color. Extradited to Montgomery County, he faced first-degree charges, the courtroom a crucible where past and present collided. Lauren, summoned to identify him in lineup, stared through the glass, her world fracturing anew. Him? Eugene. The word hung, a betrayal sharper than the original wound. Interrogation unfolded in a sterile room, cameras rolling as Augustine and Dupuy laid their cards bare. Eugene sat composed, hands folded, until the DNA reveal. "Honey, your DNA was in the crime scene." His breath hitched, eyes welling, not denial, but a dam breaking. I don't remember," he stammered, the words tumbling. "There was drinking coke. I went there, but why? God, why?" No motive crystallized, no vendetta, no robbery, only the fog of addiction's wreckage. He spoke of blackouts, of waking with bloodied knuckles and a horror that propelled him forward, burying the night in 2 decades of denial. The case, historic as Maryland's first FGGS-solved cold homicide, barreled toward trial. But in May 2025, Eugene pivoted, pleading guilty to second-degree murder, a concession to the evidence's ironclad grip, sparing a spectacle that would flay old wounds. State's Attorney John McCarthy, voice steady in court, outlined the brutality. Multiple blunt traumas, strangulation. She fought for her life. The plea capped first degree at 30 years max, but reality tempered ambition. Premeditation's proof was elusive in the haze. Sentencing convened August 28, 2025, in Rockville Circuit Court, the room thick with tension. 7 Preer kin filled the gallery. Lauren, now 46, her curls streaked gray. Sandy's siblings, faces etched by time. The Jennings octet, diminished by loss but unbowed. Victim impact statements unfurled like indictments of the soul. Lauren spoke first, voice quavering but fierce. "You were in our home, Eugene. Mom welcomed you, loved you like a son. And you took her, ripped her from us. 24 years, I've carried this hole, wondering why. Dad bore suspicion he didn't deserve. He died in 2018 with your shadow over him." Sandy had passed quietly, heart attack at 68. The case's weight a silent accomplice. A brother followed. Leslie was light, teaching ESL, baking for strangers. "You extinguished that." Sobs punctuated the air as Leslie's sister clutched a photo, her words a plea. She deserved mornings, grandchildren us. Not a shower stall in silence. Eugene, in orange jumpsuit, head bowed, offered fragmented remorse. "I can't explain it. The drugs, the darkness. I'm sorry doesn't touch it. I destroyed lives." His attorney, Isabel Raquin, painted context, a traumatic childhood, Ceausescu's scars, addiction's grip, but the judge's gaze remained unyielding. Judge Elena Ramirez weighed the scales. The brutality's echo, the family's endurance, Eugene's post-crime facade of normalcy, a son raised, careers built on borrowed time. "This was no aberration," she intoned. "It was a choice, repeated in blows and concealment." 22 years, she decreed. 8 suspended, parole eligibility after 15. Cheers erupted softly. Yes. As marshals led him away, the gavel's crack a final punctuation. Outside, Lauren paused on the courthouse steps, sun warm on her face for the first time in decades. The Jennings gathered, arms linking in a chain unbroken. Justice, belated, was a balm, not a cure, the foyer scar eternal, Leslie's laugh a ghost in the wind. But in its wake, they turned toward healing. A foundation in her name for cold case families, ESL scholarships blooming in her honor. Chevy Chase, scarred but steadfast, whispered forward. The shadow had lifted, if only by degrees, leaving room for light to reclaim the foyer. Story 5. In the fading light of a November afternoon in 1987, the small town of Ina, Illinois, clung to the edges of Jefferson County like a forgotten whisper. With a population barely scraping 450 souls, it was the kind of place where cornfields stretched endlessly under vast, indifferent skies, and the rumble of trucks on Route 37 was the closest thing to excitement. The air carried the crisp bite of autumn, mingled with the earthy scent of harvested wheat, but beneath that serenity lurked a shadow that had been growing for years. Murders had plagued the region, 15 in Jefferson County alone over the past 2, starting with a teenager who slaughtered his own family one by one as they returned home. Fear had seeped into the bones of the community, turning neighbors into strangers and locking doors that once stood open. Russell Keith Dardine, who everyone called Keith, had felt that shadow more acutely than most. At 29, he was a man of quiet routines, his life anchored by the steady hum of the water treatment plant where he worked as an operator. He had grown up in Mount Carmel, a larger town to the northeast, but in 1986, he had bought a modest mobile home on rented land just off Route 37, near the old Illinois Central Railroad tracks. It was a practical choice for a young family, close to his job at the Rend Lake Water Conservancy District, with enough space for his wife, Ruby Elaine, and their 2-year-old son, Peter. Elaine, 30 and originally from nearby Albion, had taken a job at an office supply store in Mount Vernon, the county seat. They were devout, playing in the musical ensemble at a small Baptist church in the village. Keith with his strong lead vocals, Elaine at the piano, her fingers dancing over keys that brought a rare warmth to their simple services. But by late 1987, the couple's world had shifted. Elaine was pregnant again, 7 months along, her belly rounding with the promise of new life. They had already chosen names, Ian if a boy, Casey if a girl. The impending arrival had sparked talks of change. The mobile home bore a for sale sign, a quiet declaration of their intent to leave Ina behind. Keith had confided in his mother, Joanne, that the area had grown too violent for his liking. He regretted the move from Mount Carmel, where roots ran deeper and the nights felt safer. "Even if I can't find work right away," he'd told her, his voice steady but edged with worry, "we're coming back." The murder of a 10-year-old girl in May had been the final straw. Keith had become fiercely protective, once refusing entry to a young woman who knocked on their door late at night, begging to use the phone. In a place where trust was eroding, he built walls around his family, determined to shield them from the darkness creeping closer. November 18th dawned like any other Wednesday, the sky a muted gray over the flatlands. Keith was scheduled for his 7 a.m. shift at the plant, a role he approached with the reliability of a ticking clock. He kissed Elaine goodbye, ruffled Peter's curly hair, and stepped out into the chill, his breath fogging the air. Peter, at 3, was a bundle of energy, his laughter echoing in the trailer's cozy confines as Elaine prepared for her day. She moved with the careful grace of late pregnancy, her hands often resting on her swollen abdomen, feeling the kicks of the child within. The family had shared a quiet evening the night before, dinner at the small table, perhaps a story for Peter, the baseball bat Keith had given him for his birthday propped in the corner like a sentinel. But as the morning wore on, Keith's absence became a gnawing void. His supervisor at the plant waited, then called, the phone ringing unanswered in the empty trailer. Concern mounted. Keith was not the type to vanish without word. By afternoon, the supervisor reached out to Keith's parents, Don and Joanne, divorced but still living near each other in Mount Carmel. Their voices carried the first tremors of alarm. Neither had heard from him. Don, his face etched with worry, agreed to drive down to Ina with the spare key, meeting Jefferson County Sheriff's deputies at the trailer. The sun was dipping low as they approached, the mobile home standing solitary between the highway and the railroad tracks, its windows dark against the encroaching dusk. The back door stood ajar, a detail that sent a chill through Don as he turned the key. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with an unnatural stillness. The deputies moved first, their flashlights cutting through the dim interior. In the main bedroom, horror unfolded. Elaine lay on the waterbed, her body bound and gagged with duct tape, her face a mask of brutality. Beside her, tucked under the covers as if in a macabre lullaby, were Peter and a newborn girl, tiny, fragile, her life extinguished before it could begin. All three had been beaten savagely, the blows so ferocious that Elaine had gone into labor during the attack, delivering the daughter they would name Casey, only to have her share the same fate. Blood stained the sheets, the walls, a baseball bat, Peter's birthday gift, lying nearby, slick with evidence of the violence. The scene was methodical in its aftermath. The killer or killers had taken time to arrange the bodies, to clean superficially, as if unhurried by the world outside. Keith was nowhere to be found. His red 1981 Plymouth was missing too, the empty space in the driveway a silent accusation. Whispers rippled through the deputies. Perhaps Keith had snapped, committed this unimaginable act, and fled. Armed officers raced to Joanne's home in Mount Carmel, searching for a man who might have turned monster. But as night fell, the truth twisted again. The following day, hunters combing a wheat field south of the Franklin-Jefferson County line, near Rend Lake College, stumbled upon a body. It was Keith, shot 3 times, once in the head, twice in the chest, his genitals severed in a final act of mutilation. His car turned up later, parked brazenly outside the police station in Benton, 11 miles south, its interior smeared with blood. The news spread like wildfire through Ina and beyond, igniting a terror that gripped the region. Residents, already haunted by the string of unsolved killings, armed themselves with shotguns displayed in truck racks, their eyes scanning the horizons for threats unseen. High school basketball games ended with students huddling inside, waiting for parents to escort them to safety. Rumors festered in the vacuum of facts, satanic rituals, perhaps, given the mutilation and the newborn's fate. Some whispered of a serial killer stalking the freight lines, others of vengeance from hidden sins. The air grew thick with paranoia. One man lost 14 pounds from sleepless nights, his mind replaying the horrors in endless loops. Dr. Richard Garrettson, the Jefferson County coroner and a local family physician, listened as patients poured out their fears. "It's like the whole county is holding its breath," he confided to a reporter, his voice heavy with the weight of collective dread. Investigators descended, a joint force of local police, Illinois State Police, and eventually FBI profilers, combing the scene for answers. 30 detectives worked tirelessly, interviewing over 100 people, chasing leads that evaporated like mist. A man was briefly detained, questioned, released. A co-worker of Keith's, rumored to have quarreled with him, was cleared. The Dardines were beloved, no enemies, no scandals. A small stash of marijuana in the trailer hinted at nothing. It was insignificant, perhaps left by the intruders themselves. Autopsies revealed no drugs or alcohol in the victims, their bodies clean of any vice. The timeline painted a puzzle. All 4 had died within an hour of each other. The family in the trailer killed about 12 hours before discovery, Keith dead 24 to 36 hours earlier. He might have been slain in the field, separated from his loved ones, while the perpetrators lingered at the trailer, tucking bodies into bed and wiping away traces. No forced entry, the back door open, inviting. Valuables untouched, a VCR and camera in plain sight, cash and jewelry ignored. No rape, no robbery. Motives swirled, but never solidified. Papers with sports scores suggested gambling debts, but Joanne insisted Keith was frugal, saving pennies from resold soda cans for Peter's college fund. Extramarital affairs? None surfaced. Satanists? A police expert dismissed it. No symbols, no harvested organs, no candles left burning. Franklin County Coroner Robert Lewis believed it personal, deliberate, not random. "Someone chose them," he said, his words hanging like a curse. Joanne pondered endlessly. Perhaps Keith refused to sell drugs, or spurned unwanted advances toward Elaine. The FBI profilers offered insights, but the crime defied patterns, an enigma wrapped in brutality. As leads dried up, the case cooled, but Joanne refused to let it fade. She gathered 3,000 signatures for a petition to the Oprah Winfrey Show, only to be turned down, the story too gruesome for daytime. America's Most Wanted aired a segment in 1998, yielding nothing. Years passed, the wheat fields reclaiming their silence, but the shadow lingered. In 1999, serial killer Angel Maturino Resendez, the railroad killer, surfaced, his methods, beating victims near train tracks, echoing the Dardines. But connections faltered, he was never linked. Then, on the cusp of the new millennium, Tommy Lynn Sells emerged from the darkness. A drifter from the Missouri Bootheel, scarred by childhood abuse, Sells had cut throats in Texas, confessing to murders across states while awaiting trial. Among them, the Dardines. Sells' tales varied, each a thread in a tangled web. In one, he met Keith at a truck stop near Mount Vernon, accepted a dinner invitation, then exploded in rage at a supposed sexual proposition, a threesome with Elaine. He forced Keith to drive to the field, shot and mutilated him, returned to slaughter the rest in blind fury. In another, he hopped a freight near Ina, spotted the for sale sign, posed as a buyer, overpowered Keith, bound the family, and enacted the horror. "Rage don't have a stop button," he later said, his voice flat, unrepentant. Investigators in Illinois listened, noting details that matched unreleased facts. Jefferson County State's Attorney Douglas Hoffman called him the top suspect. Sheriff Roger Mulch agreed. A deputy who visited Sells in Texas believed he knew too much to lie. Yet doubts festered. Sells' stories shifted. Wrong seat in the car for Keith's shooting. Initial errors on body positions. Texas authorities confirmed 22 of his kills, but suspected emulation of Henry Lee Lucas, confessing falsely to dodge death. Illinois wanted to bring him to Ina, test his knowledge, find missing evidence, but Texas law barred it. No charges filed, evidence insufficient. Friends and family recoiled. Keith, so cautious, inviting a stranger home. Amid the region's fear? Unlikely. The homosexual advance? Baseless, no evidence of such inclinations. Joanne, once nearly convinced, wavered. By Sells' 2014 execution, she believed him innocent of this crime. "The things he said don't match what I know about Keith," she told reporters, her voice a mix of grief and resolve. "To me, it's not over. The case remains unsolved, a wound in the heart of Illinois. The trailer is gone, the fields reclaimed, but the questions echo. Who knocked on that door? What rage or calculation drove such savagery? The Dardines, Keith with his protective love, Elaine with her gentle piano melodies, Peter with his innocent laughter, Casey who never drew breath, linger in memory, their story a testament to the fragility of peace in a world shadowed by unseen evil. In Ina, the wind still whispers through the wheat, carrying the weight of unanswered prayers. The narrative continued to unfold in the minds of those left behind, a tapestry woven from fragments of what was and what might have been. Joan Dardine, her hair graying with the passage of years, sat often in her Mount Carmel home, surrounded by photographs of Keith as a boy, smiling, carefree, before the world intruded. She remembered his frugality, the way he'd collect those soda cans at work, turning nickels into dreams for Peter's future. He was always thinking ahead, she'd say to anyone who listened, her eyes misting. The petitions, the TV appeals, they were her weapons against oblivion, a mother's fierce refusal to let the light dim on her son's memory. In the broader community, the murders became legend, a cautionary tale passed in hushed tones at diners along Route 37. The high school kids who once waited inside for their parents now grew into adults, some leaving Ina for brighter horizons, others staying, their lives marked by that November chill. Dr. Garretson's patients had moved on, but the collective psyche bore scars, doors double-locked, strangers eyed with suspicion. "It changed us," one resident reflected years later, staring out over the fields where Keith's body was found. The wheat swayed, indifferent, as if the land itself had absorbed the blood and moved forward. Tommy Lynn Sells' confessions added layers of complexity, his words a labyrinth of truth and fabrication. From his death row cell, he spoke of rage born from childhood torments, of drifting through states like a ghost, freight trains his chariot. "I moved. I was always a transient," he claimed, explaining the lack of physical ties. Yet his accounts clashed with the man Keith was, cautious, devoted, unlikely to befriend a drifter or make advances that defied his character. Investigators pored over transcripts, noting consistencies with withheld details, but the gaps yawned wide. He knew things, the deputy insisted, but Texas ironclad rules kept cells from the scene, from proving or disproving his claims. As the millennium turned, other killers flickered on the radar, Resendez with his railbound brutality, but threads unraveled. The FBI's profiles suggested a personal motive, yet no face emerged from the shadows. Joanne's doubts solidified. By 2014, as cells faced lethal injection, she mourned not closure but continued uncertainty. "I wanted him to stay alive until I know positively he didn't do it," she said, her voice a fragile thread. The execution came and went, leaving the Dardine file open, a cold case in a drawer. The emotional resonance lingered, a quiet ache. Elaine's piano sat silent somewhere, her music a lost melody. Peter's bat, once a symbol of joy, now evidence of horror. Casey, born into violence, a fleeting spark. Keith, protector turned victim, his final moments a mystery. Their story immerses us in the tension of the unknown, the stakes of fragile lives, the human impact of crimes that defy reason. In the end, the narrative is not just of death, but of the enduring quest for truth amid the silence of the fields. Story 6. The streets of Stellenbosch whispered secrets under the blanket of a crisp autumn night, their cobblestones slick with the recent rain that had painted the surrounding vineyards in shades of emerald and silver. It was the kind of evening that promised renewal, where the air carried the faint tang of fermenting grapes from the nearby wine estates, mingling with the distant hum of laughter from university parties spilling out into the town. Stellenbosch, nestled in the heart of South Africa's Western Cape, was a place of timeless beauty. A university town where ancient oaks stood sentinel over ivy-clad buildings, and students like Hannah Cornelius wandered freely, their futures stretching out like the endless rows of vines. But on the night of May 26, 2017, that fragile illusion of safety shattered in the span of heartbeats, unleashing a horror that would echo through the community like a thunderclap, leaving scars that time could neither heal nor fully comprehend. Hannah Cornelius was 21, a second-year student at Stellenbosch University, pursuing a bachelor's degree in humanities with the quiet determination that marked everything she did. Born on February 12, 1996, in Cape Town, she had grown up in a home cradled by the sea in Scarborough, a serene coastal village where the waves crashed against rocky shores and the horizon seemed to promise endless possibility. Her father, Willem, was a respected chief magistrate, a man whose career had been built on the pillars of justice and impartiality, his days spent weighing the scales of right and wrong in the solemn chambers of the courts. Her mother, Anna, was a criminal lawyer, sharp-minded and compassionate, her work a testament to her unyielding fight against the very shadows that preyed on the vulnerable. Together, they had raised Hannah and her younger brother, Andres, in a world of intellectual rigor and deep affection, where family dinners were laced with debates on ethics and evenings filled with the soft melodies of Hannah's piano playing. Hannah was the light that bound them all. From her earliest days, she had been a child of effortless grace, no colicky nights, no tantrums that tested the edges of patience. Her parents often marveled at her temperament, how she navigated the world with an innate kindness that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Andres, diagnosed with severe autism, found in his big sister a steadfast anchor. She was the one who patiently coaxed him through his routines, her voice a gentle melody that soothed his storms. At university, Hannah blossomed further. She excelled in drama and music, her performances on stage capturing the raw vulnerability of human emotion, while her studies delved into the humanities, exploring the threads that wove societies together. Friends described her as humble, her laughter infectious, her empathy profound. She volunteered in local schools, reading stories to children whose eyes widened at the worlds she conjured with her words. Life, for Hannah, was a canvas of potential, dreams of teaching, of traveling, of building bridges between the divides that plagued her country. That night, she had been out with a group of friends, celebrating the end of exams in the vibrant pulse of Stellenbosch's social scene. The air was alive with the energy of youth, Clinking glasses at rooftop bars, the strum of guitars from street performers, the shared secrets of close-knit circles. As the hours slipped toward dawn, Hannah offered to drive her friend Cheslin Marsh home. Cheslin, 22, was another Matee, a fellow student at the university, studying social work with a focus on community upliftment. Their friendship had formed organically, two souls connected by a shared passion for making a difference in a nation still grappling with its apartheid scars. Cheslin, with his easy smile and thoughtful demeanor, saw in Hannah a kindred spirit, someone who understood the quiet fire of wanting to heal the world's wounds. The blue Volkswagen City Golf hummed softly as Hannah navigated the familiar streets, the dashboard lights casting a soft glow on their faces. It was just after 2 a.m. on May 27th when they pulled up outside Cheslin's apartment block on the corner of Jan Cilliers and Bird Streets, a quiet residential spot mere blocks from the university's bustling heart. The night was still, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Hannah idled the engine, chatting idly about the evening's highlights, the plans for the weekend ahead. Cheslin reached for the door handle, his goodbye forming on his lips, when shadows detached from the darkness. For men emerged from the gloom like specters, their movements swift and predatory. Vernon Whitboy, 33, the de facto leader with a criminal history stretching back 19 years, petty thefts escalating to armed robberies, signaled to his accomplices with a sharp nod. Geraldo Parsons, 27, inked with defiant tattoos and crude depictions of violence, gripped a knife tightly, his eyes gleaming with opportunistic hunger. Eben van Niekerk, 28, broad-shouldered and silent, clutched a screwdriver, its tip glinting under the street lamp. Nashville Julius, 29, the newest to their loose affiliation of opportunists from the rough edges of Cape Town's townships, hovered at the periphery, his role as yet undefined, but his presence complicit. CCTV footage, later pored over by investigators, captured the ambush in grainy black and white. The men encircling the car like wolves closing on prey, doors yanked open with brutal efficiency. "Out! Now!" Whitboy snarled, his knife pressing against Cheslin's throat as Parsons hauled Hannah from the driver's seat. Panic surged through the young man like ice water. He fumbled for his phone, but a fist connected with his jaw, stars exploding behind his eyelids. Hannah's scream was cut short by a hand clamping over her mouth, the metallic tang of fear flooding her senses. They were dragged from the vehicle, belongings rifled, phones, wallets, a silver necklace Hannah wore from her mother, before the couple was shoved back inside. Cheslin into the cramped trunk, his body folding painfully against the spare tire, while Hannah was wedged between the front seats, her wrists bound with a belt scavenged from the car. The engine roared to life under Whitboy's command at the wheel, the City Golf peeling away into the night. What followed was an 11-hour descent into hell, a odyssey of terror that twisted through the darkened veins of the Western Cape. The men, fueled by a cocktail of tick, South Africa's corrosive crystal meth, and cheap wine pilfered from a recent smash and grab, saw the hijacking as just another score in their nocturnal routine. But with two live witnesses trapped in their grasp, the stakes escalated, paranoia gnawing at the edges of their bravado. "Drive, bitch," Parsons hissed at Hannah, forcing her hands onto the wheel when Whitboy tired of it. Her knuckles whitened, tears blurring the road ahead as she obeyed, the car's headlights carving futile paths through the blackness. They veered first toward Crayfontein, a sprawling township on the outskirts of Cape Town, where sodium lamps flickered like dying fireflies over potholed streets lined with tin shacks. Here, the men stopped at a dingy shebeen, a makeshift bar pulsing with bass-heavy Cueto music and the haze of cigarette smoke. Hannah and Cheslin, still confined, heard the revelry outside, the clink of bottles, bursts of laughter that mocked their muffled sobs. The gang emerged with more tick, forcing a pipe to Hannah's lips. "Smoke it, or your friend dies," Van Niekerk growled, his screwdriver tracing a cold line down her arm. She coughed on the acrid burn, her mind reeling as the drug's chemical claws dug in, blurring the line between resistance and surrender. Cheslin, in the trunk, pounded futilely against the lid, his pleas drowned by the engine's growl. As dawn's first light bled into the sky, the group pressed on, their path an erratic zigzag through the landscape. They targeted a woman walking alone, Mimi October, an innocent bystander whose path crossed theirs near a quiet intersection. Julius and Van Niekerk yanked her into the car, her cries joining the cacophony of despair. Robbed of her purse and phone, she was interrogated for PIN codes, her terror a grim entertainment for the men. But mercy, fleeting as it was, spared her. After extracting what they could, they shoved her out onto the roadside, bruised but alive, her escape a small mercy in the gathering storm. Cheslin's ordeal peaked in a desolate field on the fringes of Crayfontein. The trunk lid flew open, and he was hauled out, stumbling onto the dew-kissed grass. "Lie down," Whitboy ordered, his voice flat as he pressed a half-brick into Van Niekerk's hand. Cheslin's pleas tumbled out. "Please, I have money, take the car, just let us go." But they fell on deaf ears. He was forced to rest his head on a jagged rock, the earth cool against his cheek as two men loomed above him, bricks raised like executioner's tools. The first blow glanced off his temple, pain blooming like fire. The second cracked against his skull, vision tunneling to black. He lay still, feigning death, his heart hammering a silent dirge as the men prodded him with their feet, satisfied by his limp form. "He's gone," Parsons muttered, and they drove off, leaving Cheslin in the field, blood pooling beneath him. Miraculously, he stirred minutes later, his body a map of bruises and fractures, dragging himself to a nearby road where a passing motorist found him, whispering his friend's name like a prayer. Hannah, alone now with her captors, endured the unimaginable. They took her to an abandoned paintball park on the edge of town, its chain-link fences sagging like weary sentinels under the weight of neglect. Inside the shadowed structures, away from prying eyes, the assault began. The men, emboldened by the drugs and the isolation, took turns, their violation a savage unraveling of her dignity. One of them later claimed in court that she had agreed, in exchange for release, a condom produced as grotesque evidence of consent, but the tears streaming down her face and the bruises mapping her wrists told a different story, one of coercion, of survival's desperate calculus. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and dissociation. She bit back sobs, her mind fleeing to memories of her family's laughter, Andres' shy smile, the piano keys under her fingers. A fifth man, never apprehended, joined the fray, his shadow adding another layer to the nightmare. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the vineyards, the gang's paranoia crested. They drove to Norhoke Farm Road, a secluded stretch flanked by rows of grapevines heavy with unripe fruit, the air thick with the scent of damp soil and impending rain. Prosecutors would later argue this was no random stop. They intended further assault, to bind her and leave her for dead amid the vines. But Hannah, her spirit unbroken despite the wreckage of her body, fought back. When they dragged her from the trunk, she kicked and screamed, her voice a raw defiance that pierced the morning quiet. "Let me go. You've got what you wanted," she cried, nails raking across Parsons' arm, drawing blood. The resistance ignited something feral in them, a vengeful fury that turned mercy to malice. She was pinned to the ground, the earth grinding into her back as Whitboy knelt on her chest. Parsons, eyes wild, plunged a knife into her neck twice, the blade slicing through flesh with a sickening whisper. Blood welled hot and coppery, soaking her blouse, but it was not enough for them. Nearby, a massive boulder, 82 pounds of unyielding granite, originally placed to seal a borehole, lay half buried in the soil. Van Niekerk hefted it with a grunt, his muscles straining as he positioned it above her head. Someone held her skull steady, fingers tangled in her hair, forcing her to stillness. The rock descended once, a thunderous crack echoing through the valley as bone gave way, her world fracturing into oblivion. It rose and fell again, ensuring the silence they craved, her life extinguished in an instant of unimaginable brutality. They fled, leaving her body crumpled beside the borehole, the vines standing silent witness to the atrocity. Word of the hijacking spread like wildfire through Stellenbosch that morning. Cheslin, battered and bloodied, was rushed to Tygerberg Hospital, where doctors marveled at his survival, skull fractures, internal bleeding, but his will to live a testament to the human spirit. He murmured Hannah's name to the first responders, his voice a broken thread connecting them. Meanwhile, two borehole pump repairmen, driving their routine route along Norhoke Road, spotted the unnatural mound amid the underbrush. The air grew heavy as they approached, the metallic scent of blood mingling with the earthy perfume of the fields. There lay Hannah, her once vibrant form stilled, eyes staring blankly at the indifferent sky. One man retched, the other radioed for help, his hands trembling on the device. By 8 a.m., police tape cordoned the scene, forensics teams swarming like ants over crumbs, cataloging the horror. The stab wounds, the crushed skull, the signs of prolonged assault. The Cornelius home in Scarborough, a modest haven overlooking the Atlantic, descended into chaos. Willem was in court when the call came, his phone vibrating insistently during a recess. Anna, preparing breakfast for Andres, froze as the detective's voice crackled through the line. "Mr. Cornelius, there's been an incident with Hannah." The words blurred into white noise. Willem drove home in a daze, the coastal road a blur of blue sea and gray sky. Anna collapsed into his arms upon his arrival, her lawyer's composure fracturing into guttural sobs. Andres, sensing the shift in the air, rocked silently in his chair, his world tilting without comprehension. Friends arrived in waves, bearing casseroles and condolences, but nothing could fill the void. "Why her?" Anna whispered that night, staring at the ocean that had always been her solace. She was light. She was everything good. The investigation moved with uncharacteristic speed, propelled by public outrage and the glaring CCTV footage. Stellenbosch, a town where students walked freely at all hours, now felt like a trap waiting to spring. Parents double-locked doors, friends formed walking groups, the university's rector addressing assemblies with pleas for vigilance. The video showed the faces clearly enough for tips to flood in. Neighbors who recognized Whitboy's swagger, former associates whispering about Parsons' tattoos. Within hours, police spotted the Blue City Gulf weaving erratically through Crayfantine, its bumper dented from the night's frenzy. A chase ensued, sirens wailing like banshees through the townships, ending in a screech of tires and 4 arrests. The men, disheveled and defiant, were hauled from the vehicle, their alibis crumbling under the weight of bloodied clothes and stolen goods. Charges piled like accusations from the grave: murder, rape, attempted murder, kidnapping, robbery with aggravating circumstances. The Western Cape High Court in Cape Town became a crucible, the trial commencing in August 2018 under Judge Roshini Ali. The accused, Whitboy, Parsons, Van Niekerk, and Julius, sat in the dock, their expressions a mask of nonchalance that bordered on mockery. They laughed during recesses, exchanged notes with supporters in the gallery, their lack of remorse a secondary wound to the victims' families. Cheslin testified first, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, recounting the blows that should have ended him. "I prayed," he said simply, "for Hannah, for me, for it to stop." The courtroom fell silent as pathologists detailed the autopsy. Severe blunt force trauma, rapidly fatal, neck wounds defensive, intimate injuries confirming the gang assault. DNA from a discarded condom near the borehole sealed their fates, Parsons' thumbprint a damning fingerprint of guilt. Victim impact statements pierced the sterile air like arrows. Willem, his once imposing frame shrunken by grief and the cancer diagnosis that followed 3 months after Hannah's death, took the stand. "Our family died with Hannah," he said, his voice cracking. He spoke of Anna's transformation, from a vibrant advocate to a shadow haunting their home, her swims in the ocean a ritual turned tragic. On March 7, 2018, Anna had entered the waves at Scarborough as the sun rose, her flu-weakened body succumbing to the current. Rescuers found her washed ashore, the sea claiming what despair had eroded. "She walked into the ocean and didn't return," Willem told the judge, his eyes distant. Andres, now cared for in a specialized center, could not grasp the losses. His drawings, once filled with stick-figure families, now looped in solitary circles. The gallery wept openly, the accused shifting uncomfortably for the first time. On November 7, 2018, verdicts rang out. Guilty on all major counts for Whitboy, Parsons, and Van Niekerk. Julius convicted of lesser roles, having fled before the worst. Sentencing followed 5 days later. The courtroom packed with activists from groups like the Mitchell's Plain Crisis Forum, their presence a chorus of communal fury. Judge Alley, her gaze steady, described the crimes as cruel, vengeful, vicious, a premeditated savagery that demanded society's shield. Whitboy and Parsons each received 2 life terms for rape and murder, plus 115 years for the litany of robberies, kidnappings, and attempted murder. Van Niekerk mirrored them with life plus 128 years. Julius, his flight a thin veil of mitigation, drew 22 years. Cheers erupted as marshals led them away, jeers of gangsters, mingling with sobs of catharsis. Julius' appeal bid crumbled in February 2019. The court affirmed his active role, no mercy for complicity. Yet justice, cold and procedural, could not resurrect what was lost. Stellenbosch mourned in waves. Vigils under the oaks, where candles flickered like fallen stars. Motorbike processions thundering through the streets in Hannah's honor, engines roaring defiance against silence. The university installed better lighting, safety apps, community patrols, small fortifications against the encroaching dark. But the ripple spread wider, igniting national discourse on gender-based violence. The chasm between townships like Crayfontein and affluent enclaves like Stellenbosch. Protests swelled, demanding systemic change. Hannah's name invoked alongside other fallen daughters. Courtney Peters, Karabo Makona, voices in a chorus too vast and too silent. Story 7. In the quiet suburban sprawl of Lake Elsinore, California, where the sun baked the earth into a dusty mosaic of tract homes and distant mountains, Celeste Rivas Hernandez grew up as a girl full of quiet dreams and unspoken rebellions. Born on September 7, 2010, she was the kind of child who could light up a room with her bubbly energy, yet retreat into books and sketches when the world felt too heavy. Her family, a tight-knit group anchored by her mother and siblings, lived in a modest home where the air often carried the scent of homemade meals and the echoes of laughter mixed with worry. Celeste was studious, her teachers would later recall, always buried in her notebooks, jotting down stories or solving math problems with a furrowed brow that made her seem older than her years. But beneath that intelligence simmered a restlessness, a desire to escape the confines of her everyday life, which manifested in ways that would shatter her family's world. It started small, as these things often do. In February 2024, when Celeste was just 13, she vanished for the first time. Her family reported her missing to the Riverside County Sheriff's Office, their hearts gripped by the terror of the unknown. Lake Elsinore wasn't a place of high drama. It was a community of working families, where kids played in cul-de-sacs and the biggest news was a local festival. But Celeste had been pulling away, her mother noticed, spending more time on her phone, whispering secrets to friends about dreams of something bigger, perhaps the glittering allure of Los Angeles just over the hills. She returned home after a short while, safe but changed, her explanations vague. A visit to a friend's house, a need for space. The family breathed a sigh of relief, chalking it up to teenage whims, but the seed of worry had been planted. By April 5, 2024, the pattern repeated. Celeste told her brother she was heading to the movies with someone named David, a name that floated into the conversation like a half-remembered dream. She didn't return that night or the next. The family mobilized, plastering flyers around her school, posting pleas on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, begging for any sign of their girl. Her mother, a woman worn by years of single-handedly raising her children, felt the failure deep in her bones, though her son would later insist she had done everything right. Searches extended even to relatives in Mexico, who shared photos and prayed across borders. Celeste was described in those desperate posts, a bright-eyed girl with a warm smile, about 5 feet tall, with dark hair and a tattoo on her right index finger that read a small rebellion inked into her skin, perhaps a symbol of secrets she kept close. Weeks turned into months, and Celeste resurfaced briefly, only to disappear again. Reports from the sheriff's office noted she had gone missing at least 3 times that year, each episode a harrowing echo of the last. Neighbors whispered about her disturbing family life, though details were scarce, rumors of arguments, of a home that felt too confining for a spirit as free as hers. But those who knew her painted a different picture. Celeste was intelligent, a hard worker who helped around the house and dreamed of something beyond the Inland Empire's dusty horizons. Her absences weren't just flights of fancy. They were cries for autonomy in a world that seemed to close in on her. Amid these vanishings, a new figure entered Celeste's orbit. David Anthony Burke, a 20-year-old singer whose star was rising on the wings of hits like Romantic Homicide. Born in Queens, New York, and later based in Texas, David had carved out a niche in the music industry with his emotive lyrics and shy demeanor. He was described by friends as quiet, introverted, a young man more comfortable in the studio than in the spotlight. His music spoke of love and loss, dark undercurrents woven into melodies that resonated with millions. By early 2024, as his Withered World tour loomed, David was renting a luxurious home in the Hollywood Hills, a $20,000 a month retreat on Sunset Boulevard, far removed from the modest streets of Lake Elsinore. How Celeste and David crossed paths remains one of the case's enduring mysteries, shrouded in speculation and fragmented clues. Social media sleuths would later unearth photos and videos suggesting they had been seen together, possibly as early as February 2024. One social media post from David on February 26th showed him in a casual setting, with online comments accusing him of involvement with an underage girl. Harrowing words that, in hindsight, carried a chilling prescience. By March, fans buzzed about rumors of David dating someone named Celeste. She was spotted at his concerts, including one in Maryland in late August 2025, where a girl resembling her, wearing a tube top, her demeanor mirroring David's quiet intensity, appeared in fan videos. Friends of David later claimed they believed her to be 19, a USC student, thanks to fake IDs that allowed her into age-restricted events. They described the pair as romantically involved, frequently together, with Celeste seeming to echo David's shyness. But the timeline was fraught with shadows. Celeste had been in sporadic contact with family until July 2025, according to some accounts, even as she was listed as a missing person since 2024. Private investigator Steve Fisher, hired by those connected to her family, noted that she had run away multiple times before, often from what was described as a turbulent home environment. Fisher revealed that David's manager, Josh Marshall, had been informed in 2024 that Celeste was an underage runaway, shattering any claims of ignorance. Yet the relationship, if that's what it was, persisted, a secret woven into the fabric of David's rising fame. As summer 2025 unfolded, David's tour took him across the U.S., his performances a blend of raw emotion and stage presence. Behind the scenes, however, tension brewed. In late August, just before his shows in the Northeast, whispers of Celeste's presence at events surfaced online. She turned 15 on September 7, 2025, a birthday that would go unmarked in the public eye, lost to the encroaching darkness. What happened in those final days remains unclear, but theories abound. Fisher floated the possibility of an overdose. Perhaps Celeste, in a moment of vulnerability, ingested something fatal, laced marijuana or a synthetic drug, and those around her panicked. A crime absolutely happened here, Fisher opined. She didn't put herself in the Tesla, but it might not have been homicide. Toxicology results, expected in 60 to 120 days, would be key, as her body might not yield immediate answers due to decomposition. The Hollywood Hills home, with its panoramic views and modern luxuries, became the epicenter of suspicion. Neighbors noticed David's 2023 Tesla parked erratically, abandoned for days in early September. A foul odor emanated from it, prompting complaints and eventually impoundment to Hollywood Tow on September 8th. There, workers discovered the horror: a badly decomposed body in the front trunk, wrapped in a plastic bag, dismembered remains that spoke of desperation or concealment. The vehicle, registered to David in Hempstead, Texas, linked the scene directly to the singer. Identification came swiftly but painfully. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office used dental records and the distinctive tattoo on her right index finger, a match to one David himself bore. Celeste Rivas Hernandez, the missing girl from Lake Elsinore, had been found, her official date of death listed as September 8, 2025, the day of discovery, though she had likely perished earlier. The cause was deferred pending further tests, but the investigation shifted to homicide, handled by LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division. Back in Lake Elsinore, the news hit like a thunderclap. Ruby Alonso, a family friend whose son had played with Celeste in kindergarten, mourned the loss of a studious, hard worker and intelligent girl. "She deserves justice," Alonso said, her voice echoing the community's grief and anger. Celeste's family, devastated, set up a GoFundMe for funeral costs, raising over $24,000 as tributes poured in. Her mother, silent in her sorrow, felt the weight of perceived failure, though relatives insisted she had searched tirelessly. An Instagram account, reactivated by family, shared their pain. "We lost our girl. Our home is quiet and broken." Police moved quickly. On September 18, 2025, detectives served a search warrant on the Sunset Boulevard rental, seizing electronics, computers, and other items. Luminol tests reportedly checked for blood traces, though results were not public. David, on tour when the body was found, canceled remaining U.S. and European dates, his website barren of future shows. His representative stated he was fully cooperating with authorities, but he remained unnamed as a suspect. LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell, in a measured interview, confirmed resources were dedicated but declined specifics, noting that any potential relationship would be scrutinized. Speculation swirled online. Videos from David's concerts showed a girl resembling Celeste, narrowing the timeline of her death. An unreleased track allegedly referencing a Celeste fueled rumors, as did accusations that David had deleted song posts. Friends defended him, insisting they thought she was of age, but Fisher countered that ignorance was impossible given prior warnings to Marshall. Theories of panic after an overdose gained traction. If Celeste had died accidentally, perhaps from drugs, hiding her body could explain the scene without premeditated murder. Yet, the dismemberment suggested something more deliberate, a desperate act to conceal. As weeks passed, Celeste's body was released to her family on September 23, 2025, for memorial services, hinting that preliminary autopsy findings might exist, though the cause remained deferred. Forensic analyst Joseph Scott Morgan noted that decomposition could complicate evidence, but toxicology would reveal if substances played a role. The investigation dragged on, a slow burn of leads and lab results, leaving the public, and Celeste's loved ones, in limbo. In the quiet aftermath, Lake Elsinore mourned. Candles flickered at impromptu vigils, friends shared memories of Celeste's laughter, her sketches of faraway places. David, holed up away from the spotlight, faced the unraveling of his carefully built world. The case, unresolved, hung like a shadow over Hollywood's glamour, a reminder of hidden lives and unspoken pains. Celeste's story, from her first disappearance to the tragic discovery, was one of lost potential, of a girl seeking freedom in a world that offered none. The tension built not in grand chases but in the quiet accumulations, a missing report, a whispered name, a car left abandoned. Emotionally, it resonated with the human cost, the family's broken home, a mother's silent grief, a young artist's fall from grace. As toxicology reports loomed, the stakes remained high, the truth a distant horizon.